premise of the podcast, you say, hey, Mr. Architect, really like what you're doing over there at ABC Architecture. I would love to bring you on my show. It's called the Remodeling Podcast. Again, think of something more creative, but I'm just using these as an example. So, hey, I'd love to have you on my show, the Remodeling Podcast, and I'd love to interview you about your history and what you do and your craft and your expertise. And then after the show, we're going to promote it, and we're going to promote your business, and we're going to share it with our audience, and we're going to spread the word about this content so more people are exposed to you. All right, welcome back to Builder Funnel TV. Today we are going to talk about podcasting. So the question is, should remodelers be podcasting? The short answer is yes, but in this video I want to talk about why you should be podcasting, and then I'm going to give you two really clear-cut examples on how you could start a podcast, why it would be valuable to start a podcast, and then where the impact would be for your business. So we're going to break them down. Before we get to those first two, though, there's going to be 88 million podcast listeners. Actually, that was 2019, so we already had 88 million. Forecast, though, for podcast listeners by 2023, 160 million. So it's still going to about double over the next 3 or 4 years in terms of listenership. So if you're thinking about your ideal client and your target audience, there's a very, very good chance that they're going to be listening to podcasts if they aren't already. And so I think that creates a very unique opportunity, especially for remodelers where you have a local business and your clientele is local. You can be a little more targeted, and you can find some content that's maybe a little more interesting to them, and you can kind of carve out a nice piece of that local market in terms of making you and your company a thought leader in the area and not just another company. Let's talk about that thought leadership piece for a second, and then I want to break down kind of those two tactical ways that you could be using podcasting. So we've been podcasting here at Builder Funnel for a little over 3 years, and we started it a little bit as an experiment. We often try to practice what we preach, so we just said, hey, we're going to do podcasting. We're going to do it for a year before we even decide if it's worthwhile or not. And one of the biggest things that's come out of it is that we are starting to be seen as thought leaders in the industry and within the space. And the reason that that starts to happen is because you're putting yourself out there in terms of just the volume of content. So if you do a weekly show, you've got 52 podcasts going out throughout an entire year, but you're also exposing yourself to other thought leaders and other guests. So when you start to invite them onto your show, then that brings your credibility up a little bit. And so again, I'll talk about how you guys can start to do this within the remodeling space. But then it also just gives you a chance for your customers to get to know you a little bit. They get to hear you, they get to kind of interact with you. And so when they actually reach out, they feel like they know you already. And that is a powerful concept. It makes the sales process a lot easier. So with that being said, again, with the stats behind supporting podcast growth, and then also this fact that you can basically take your company, take your personal brand, and build some thought leadership around it, I think it's a giant opportunity for remodelers going forward. Let's talk about the first concept, and I'm going to call that kind of the partner podcast, or the partner style podcast. So let's say you're a remodeling company as an example. You start a podcast, and the goal with this podcast is simply to build out your partner and referral base. So I'd imagine a lot of you get business from architects. Maybe you get business from designers. Maybe you get business from real estate agents. Maybe it's even lenders. You've probably got this pool of partner, referral partners, companies, people like that they send you business every once in a while. So the strategy here is that you create a show. It's around remodeling and remodeling themed, but every week you're going to invite one of these referral partners to be on your show. Now, what this does is a few things. So a lot of times people get stuck in the whole networking thing. They're like, well, I've got a I've got these two great architect partners, but I can't seem to like network in with any more. And it would be great if I just had 4 or 6 because they'd all be sending me work. Or hey, I've got this one real estate agent. They always send me work, but nobody else does. And so you think, well, gosh, if I could just expand these networks a little bit, then I could grow my business pretty easily. The problem is you never have a good reason to reach out and start that relationship, right? It's always kind of these things that developed organically, but then that's why they only kind of stop at 2 or 3 or 4, and you never build out this really robust network. So with the premise of the podcast, you say, hey, Mr. Architect, really like what you're doing over there at ABC Architecture. I would love to bring you on my show. It's called the Remodeling Podcast. Again, think of something more creative, but I'm just using these as an example. So, hey, I'd love to have you on my show, the Remodeling Podcast, and I'd love to interview you about your history and what you do and your craft and your expertise. And then after the show, we're going to promote it, and we're going to promote your business, and we're going to share it with our audience, and we're going to spread the word about this content so more people are exposed to you. So one, it gives you a great reason to reach out to that person. And so now you've got a good excuse, you've formed that connection, and then they say, sure, let's do it. Well, hey, let's do a quick 15-minute connect call to kind of talk about what we want to talk about in the show, get to know each other a little bit. So boom, you do a quick 15 minutes. Now you've started that relationship. You're going back and forth. You book some time to record. You either do it in person or via Zoom or whatever you want. Usually before the recording, you're going to chat for a few minutes. Then you're going to do the podcast, and then you're actually going to probably chat at the end again. And so then you've had all of this time where you've gotten to know this person. And then when you release the podcast, you're again going to reach out, hey, we just launched this episode. It was a great episode. Looking forward to sharing it with our audience. Feel free to pass it along. Now you've just formed a relationship, and that's usually one of the toughest parts. So if you take that concept and you scale it out over a year and you invite 52 different architects, real estate agents, designers, lenders, all these people, now they're all in your network. And so now they know about you, and you've built some trust, and you've actually given them something, right? You promoted their business. So if you talk about or hear about the law of reciprocity, then they'll probably want to return the favor. But at the very least, now you've formed the relationship. If they get that opportunity, there's a good chance they're going to let you in on a next job, or at least throw something your way and test it out to see if it goes anywhere. But can you imagine if you had just took a year and committed to this strategy, and you formed, maybe half of them or a quarter of them actually turn into meaningful long-term relationships? Your business would just balloon. So I call that the partner podcast style. Again, I think that in and of itself could be a game changer for so many companies, especially if you have no connections. Well, now you have a show, you have a platform, and you start reaching out. It's an easy ask, and it's an easy way to reach out and start these conversations, because the other option is just, hey, I like what you're doing over there. I'd love to buy you coffee sometime. Nobody wants to do another coffee, but they do want to do a podcast where you're going to promote their business. So check it out, and then imagine the compounding effects of year over year of that strategy. All right, so let's talk about the next one. The next one is an evergreen kind of style, where you're just doing a regular cadence of podcasts. So it could be weekly, it could be bi-weekly, could be monthly. I recommend trying to be a little more consistent than that, but that's going to be kind of a regular style show. On this show, you have kind of unlimited content opportunities. You could talk about design trends. You could talk about the construction process, like what all the steps are. You could even kind of create little mini series within this show where you break down the process and say, hey, season 1 is going to be all about the remodeling process, and then you kind of go into a season 2 and you talk about design, and you could kind of break it up that way so people can digest it. But this sort of show, the end goal is actually to educate your end customer, your end client. And so again, when we think about that thought leadership piece that I talked about at the beginning, what you're doing here is when somebody finds you and they get to know about your company and your personal brand, they want to get to know you, and the podcast allows them to get to know you and build up in brand. We talk about this metric where it's time spent with your brand. And so they're going to go and listen to, say, 6 episodes. They're each 30 minutes long. Now they've spent, 3 hours with you. They've been hearing your voice. They've been hearing you talk. So when they actually get into the sales process, they feel like they already know you. They've heard you speak. They've heard you go through and educate them. They actually, not only do they just know you, but now that you've educated them, you've built trust through that as well. And so this content piece of podcasting is super powerful. It allows you to record something. Say you're not super comfortable in front of the camera, with something like this, and you hate writing. This is a great medium for a lot of people, especially introverted people, because you can basically just hop behind a microphone, start hitting record, and you can do what you do best, which is speak the language and share what you have a lot of knowledge about. Obviously, you could take this style and run with it. You could bring on different experts and guests. You could even bring on clients and talk about client experiences. So if you had a few clients that you've done work with in the past, you could say, hey, I'd love to have you on my show and talk about our project that we did together and kind of do a project walkthrough or project case study. There's unlimited types of ideas and opportunities with this style, but basically you're just creating regular content where the goal is to educate and inform, and by doing that, you actually start to build a ton of trust and credibility. And again, that's what a lot of this is about, is trying to build that with your prospect base as they're doing research online, before they actually get into the sales process. The other thing I guess I'll mention too is with podcasting, what we found is it's a medium that does allow you to multi-purpose. So I did mention, hey, if you're not comfortable with video, it's a great channel. But if you do just hit the record button on the video as well, especially if you record over Zoom or something like that, you can actually take those clips, chop them up, and then push those out over your social media platforms. And you can just take little bite-sized pieces of 30 seconds, a minute, where maybe you're talking about something, put that on your Instagram, put that on your Facebook, your LinkedIn, and now you've taken maybe 45 minutes of recording time, and now you've chopped it up into 3 or 4 or 5 clips, and now you have all of this content that you can distribute. And so it actually takes a lot of the load off your content creation, which is sometimes the most challenging for a lot of people. So I really like that as well. And then I guess I'll leave you with kind of a couple of stories, and maybe one very specific story. But when we first started the podcast, I didn't really know if it was going to work. It was an experiment. We said, hey, let's commit to it for a year, see if we can just tell if this is a channel we want to invest in. And what started to happen was, on all the sales calls, I started hearing people mentioning, hey, I've been listening to your podcast for a while. Really good stuff. Or, hey, thanks for putting out all that content via the podcast. I've been learning a lot. That's actually why I reached out. I actually had one conversation with a guy named BJ, and he told me on our first call together, he said, hey, I feel like I'm kind of talking to a celebrity. And that kind of threw me for a loop, because I'm going, that's a little bit weird. But he said, hey, I found your podcast on episode 3. I think at this point we were on like 70 or 80 or something like that. He said, I went back to the first episode and I've been listening ever since. So he had been listening for a year and a half, 2 years straight. And then he finally reached out and we talked. It was a good fit. We ended up doing business together. It was a very smooth sales process. And that just was a key example and key insight for me that showed me kind of the power of allowing somebody to come into your world and get exposed to you and hear your voice and get to know your style and learn from you over time when the timing is right. Like, think about it. If they've been listening to you for 6 months or a year on your podcast, do you think they're going to work with you or the competitor where they've been to their portfolio page and seen a couple of things on their website? It's kind of a no-brainer. They've already built that relationship. Even though you're meeting them for the first time, they don't feel like they're meeting you for the first time in a weird way. So that's my big plug for podcasting. I think those 2 different styles create a great opportunity. I think you could mix and match them. You could do them separately. And I think both strategies are great ones, especially as we think about heading into the next year. So get out there, start your podcast. I think it will have a huge impact on your business. And if you have any questions or just want to chat further about podcasting, comment below. Let us know what you think, and we'll be jumping in there. See you next time here on Builder Funnel TV.